Yo, what is up, everybody? Ceresco back again. Another short horror story written by Vivian Justin. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to them. Like, comment, and subscribe. Story 5, Jungle. James and Morgan were heading deep into the jungle. It was their vocation and their hobby. They went to areas where either no one or very few people had ever been. They loved exploring new areas. James packed a rucksack and a small suitcase. He planned to leave the suitcase at the hotel and just take the backpack with him. Morgan had a harder job. He had a lot of stationary notebooks. He kept notes of the whole trip in a somewhat diary-like fashion. They were afraid of this trip. This place is where only their professor and a few of his colleagues had been. They reported hearing some very scary noises. But James and Morgan's curiosity was only heightened. They boarded the plane with shaky legs from excitement. The plane took off. He fell asleep immediately while Morgan went over the planned route again and again. She calculated that if all went well, they could leave for home a day after tomorrow morning. Their plane would land at 3 this afternoon. They'd check into the hotel and be on their way that evening. Tomorrow night, they'll sleep in the hotel. James woke up to Morgan's alarm. Their plane descended and landed nicely. They took a taxi to the hotel. They quickly picked up the 2 suitcases and set off with their rucksacks. Morgan led the way, James close behind. They made their way into the jungle, avoiding the many warning signs. James was no longer a bit worried, but she was. As they moved further and further in, James could no longer see a path behind them. Another problem was that he felt as if 1,000 eyes were watching him all the time. They had been walking for hours before they reached the place where the professors were camped. It was the first stop, although Morgan would have kept going. Night had fallen, and James was roasting on a spit over the fire, while Morgan looked around a bit. He had that strange feeling, again, that he was being watched. But no one was there. He heard voices in the trees. He called to Morgan, but got no answer. It made him even more desperate. He heard the scary sounds more and more, the branches cracking. Then, Morgan appeared in front of him. He was all right. They were sleeping peacefully in the tent when James suddenly woke up. He heard another noise, and it was as if someone or something was crawling around the tent. He cautiously crawled out from beside Morgan as if he had been in water, but ignoring him, he jumped out of the tent. He saw tracks. It was like 100 branches snapping in the woods at once. His rapid breathing and bulging eyes were visible signs of fear from deep within. There was complete silence. After a few minutes of silent standing, he laid back down. In the morning, he woke up to find Morgan gone. He immediately ran out and shouted, but there was no answer from her. James walked a few meters into the jungle from all directions, but Morgan was nowhere to be found. He went back hoping that while he packed up the tent, she would appear. It was then he realized that what he had thought was water at night was actually blood. He threw up behind him. On closer inspection, there wasn't as much as if anyone had died. James had lost his senses and was doing everything in his power to find Morgan. He ran into the woods like a fool. Early afternoon. James shouted in vain. No one answered. He was completely lost in the jungle. He leaned against a tree and cried. After a while, he pulled himself together and started shouting Morgan's name again. Evening. He sat down. In this tickled his feet. He heard strange noises behind him, but he was no longer afraid if it might lead him to Morgan. The surroundings were getting louder. It was as if he could hear footsteps behind them. He sat up and stared ahead of him. Secretly, he wished she was the only one messing with him, but it didn't. A huge, hairy arm grabbed him by the throat and pulled him down into the depths. Night. He woke up to find himself lying on the ground right next to Morgan's body. She lay with a face as peaceful as perhaps he had ever seen her, but her belly was completely ripped open. He would have screamed, but no sound came out of his mouth in shock. Then he slowly looked around. He saw no movement anywhere. The only thing that kept him from fleeing was Morgan. He couldn't leave her like this. He looked around again and again. Then he remembered the professor's note to always come back to the hotel. But where was that? James struggled to his feet. He looked behind him, and that's when he saw the horror. An ape-like creature with a huge body and arms. When it bared its teeth, The word razor sharp came to James' mind first. Its eyes were red, and it roared and charged at James. Morning. The hotel receptionist was able to follow their journey to the jungle entrance because they hadn't checked out on time. He stopped just outside the entrance. Then the owner appeared beside him. They were allowed to walk the same way as the others. No one read the sign. No trespassing due to infection. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our story.